Science gave me a fantastic playground and a way to express myself.
It goes to the heart of why we're human, to explore the origin and nature of the universe and ourselves.
Why has science become so central to my life? It makes a huge amount of sense to me to get answers where I can prove one way or another.
Growing up as the son of immigrants, science and studies were a refuge.
For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc, and this is After the Fact. It's a new season, and we'll be hearing this fall from voices like these, each with a passion for science. New medicines from a lab, the technology that allows you to hear me right now, the analysis of big data like the epidemiology going on now to better understand how the coronavirus is transmitted. It's all science, and it's intertwined with our lives every day.
We think of it as an encyclopedia of books, right? There's a fact in a book, and that's going to be that way forever. But it's not. Science is a process.
That's Ira Flatow, host of the popular public radio program Science Friday, and you'll hear from him again shortly. But first, our data point, 79%. According to the Pew Research Center, 79% of us agree that science has made life easier for most people. And as most of us learned in school, there's a method, the scientific method, and it always begins with a question. Now back to Ira, who began asking questions as a kid.
I was always interested in science. I never wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be an engineer because I wanted to know how things work. And so I would take things apart. I would take my mother's washing machine apart. I learned how to fix black and white televisions myself. I would enter science fair projects. I really wanted to know how the world worked, and I was very curious about how that happens. I was lucky also to have a teacher, Mrs. Pfeffer, my 8th grade teacher, who had a science club. And I think it's very important for people to know that kids need some sort of mentoring. If I didn't have Mrs. Pfeffer encouraging me after school to do projects, and one of which I almost burned down my mother's bathroom, but that's another story, I think I would not have kept my interest going, but that's how I got started.
So let me ask you a question where you fill in the blank at the end of this sentence. Without science, we would be?
Back in the Stone Age. I mean, who invented, the question of who invented the wheel? I mean, how much experimentation did that take? Well, without science, we wouldn't have the medicines we have today. We wouldn't have the transportation we have today. We wouldn't have the health we have today. I could go on and on. We wouldn't have the stock market we have today.
There is the scientific method. There's a way you follow to do science, and guess what? It works. I mean, how do you explain that to people?
Science is basically a snapshot of what we know about the world working at one time, and that's now, and what we might know in the future by doing research. And the word research is really very important in this central idea, because how does science work? Well, you come up with an idea, and then you search for evidence for your idea. You come up with, okay, a conclusion. I think the universe works this way, or I think a drug works that way. We then have to research it. We have to send somebody else out to do the search, or many people to go out and do that search. So science is research over and over again until it becomes accepted. The second thing about science is that people think that all scientists agree with each other, and they don't. But science looks for the truth and sort of polls the scientific community about what the general agreement is at any one point in time. But eventually, if there's enough research that goes on, it changes the current thinking, and that changes how we think about something that's going on in the world. And so you then publish the data, and that's very important. You publish what you have found so that the rest of the community, the rest of your peers, peer-reviewed things, can comment on what you've done. The main idea is that it is not a static thing. We are part of a moving target of history, and science works that way, telling us what we know at any one time.
Can we employ the scientific method in sort of our day-to-day lives, just futzing through, trying to figure things out?
Absolutely. If we didn't call it the scientific method and called it something else, there would be a lot of people who'd be bored with understanding what it is, I mean, the scientific method, whether whether you're shopping for clothing or whether you're buying a car or whether you're trying to believe what your friends are telling you, it's all about listening and collecting the information and seeing whether it makes sense.
That whole being able to replicate something shows that there's something to it, as opposed to a one-time wonder.
They like to say that science is self-correcting. You may not agree with what's going on now, but over a period of time, enough people who want to prove you wrong, and they are all out there, they will conduct their own experiments and try to prove that you are right or you are wrong. And over time, if you are wrong, science will self-correct itself to bring around a new idea and move on from there.
So there's motion to the method, and it can become a wondrous thing to watch. Carlo Rovelli, a world-renowned theoretical physicist and writer, sees a beauty and a depth in science. Carlo Rovelli, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You are a physicist who I must say writes like a poet. And your book, The 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, is in something like 40 languages around the world. And it ends with this most amazing line that I would like to start our conversation with, if you don't mind. You say that on the edge of what we know, in contact with the oceans of the unknown, shines the mystery and the beauty of the world. Is that science? Is that the pursuit of science for you?
Yes, definitely. Because science starts, I think, both historically and in the life of each scientist, with the wonder and with the mystery. And in fact, I think the nature of science is to realize that we do not know things, and therefore we're curious to go and try to find out. And the nature of science is also based on the discovery that we can find out things. We can discover things that we did not know.
There's a methodology to science. There is a scientific method. But the scientific method is both something that leads us forward, but also makes us pause, makes us reevaluate. Science, it seems, despite methodology, is not linear.
It's like painting. Of course, there is a method for painting. You go to school and they teach you how to paint. But then the painter is the guy who does not follow what is being taught and invents something else. Of course, there are many aspects of science which are pretty stable and that give it strength. Checking, not trusting ideas unless you find a way to confirm them. Try to base your information on actual data and looking at the world, observing, measuring, checking. Putting in doubt, not believing the things you believe. There's a beautiful line in Brecht, Galileo, in the play, in which at the end, Galileo, the one of the inventors of science, so to say, with one of his young assistants, and they got an idea, and the assistant says, okay, now let's do everything possible to show that it is right. And Galileo says, no, let's do it everything possible to show that it is wrong. And if it survives, maybe we start believing it.
Fascinating, yes. So, we are speaking at a time when the world, of course, is facing this terrible pandemic. And scientific research about this is unfolding before our eyes. The public who maybe doesn't follow these things, this methodology, this way of doing business closely, has a real stake in this, right, to see what's going on. Are there lessons for us all in what we're learning and how this is unfolding?
Yeah, I think there are lessons, and in fact, it's an opportunity for seeing how science works. The first thing we all notice is that we don't know anything. We are in the dark, and that's often the starting point of science. The second thing is we are not completely in the dark. The reason we are searching for a way to heal this virus and for vaccines is because we have ways to heal illnesses that are extraordinarily effective. So on the one hand, we see the limits of science. On the other hand, we see the immense power of science. A few generations ago, not many, maybe 2 centuries ago, the life expectancy of people were several decades shorter than today. This is because there was a scientific method of some sort that helped us to learn how to deal with illness, and that's what is being used. The second point is that we see that scientists look in different directions. However, there is convergence, and that's the point. There are always been convergence in scientific debates and uncertainty. So after the debate, after the search, the knowledge that is acquired is definitely knowledge. So it will take time, but it will come out. We all see how science is crucial. I mean, if there's anything that can save us for a lot of pain in this situation, is scientific knowledge. But then the actual decisions are political, are moral, are value decisions. There are a lot of hard decisions that society can only take by negotiating, by politics, by debate, by discussion.
Also in your book, you write this lovely sentence: "We are like an only child who, in growing up, realizes the world does not revolve only around himself. He must learn to be among others." That seems to me, a view of science that talks about our common humanity and how we learn about each other. Is that what you were trying to get at there?
Oh, yes, definitely. We exist a part of a network, both individually, a network of humanity, and humanity as a part of network in biology and as part of the larger aspect of things. And this is important because one of the major crises humanity is facing, probably much bigger than the current epidemics, is ecological crisis in the larger sense, the heating of the planet and the collapsing of the species. So we have to obviously to take care of that, and we have to take care of that collectively. And we do that by realizing not that we are a sort of powerful thing outside nature, but we're part of nature, and we have to find the best way to interact with it.
So I think what you're saying, though, is science is going to be perhaps one of the most important guides for us in saving the world in the coming years. I mean, we do face some enormous challenges. Is science up to that task right now?
Science is a tool that we have, and we should not mistake a tool with our ideology or our objective. The value that we have don't come from science, come from ourselves, from inside ourselves. We want to survive because we want to survive. We want humanity to survive because we want it to survive. And then we look for tools. And science today is by far the best tool we have. If you want to go to the moon, you ask a scientist. If you want to heal a person with pneumonia, you ask a scientist. If you want to build a bridge, you ask a scientist. Or you ask somebody who relies on knowledge that were developed by scientists. I think we should be guided by a discussion among us on moral and political values. But then we should be careful to what scientists say, because they are, raising red flags, and we should listen to the solution that they can offer, knowing that they are not necessarily complete solution. It's the best we have so far.
Carlo Rovelli, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. We've learned a lot about what makes science science, but are we trusting the science we hear about? In our next episode, more on being in the middle of a living experiment.
There's a little nugget of information that's going on here. As a public, we have been learning all sorts of information we didn't know, including the idea that there is such a thing as coronavirus.
We hope you join us to hear more. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc, and this is After the Fact.